Hey, good morning. It's really great to see you. It feels like it's been eons since we've all been together. I just wanted to echo what Hannah said. Thank you. It was sure a remarkable opportunity to get to create that and lead that for our community. So thank you for all of you that were a part of that, whether it was the day of or well in advance, or even the many of you who were involved through your giving. That obviously is an expensive day, and it's all made possible by all of you. So thank you for that. When we all got back to the office together, I think it was Wednesday, the first time there was a few of us in the office together, Marla made the comment, who leads our tech and lots of other art things along with Kate. She said, it hit me over the break. We couldn't do Christmas Eve at the Civic Center without Lenny. Now, for those of you who don't know Lenny, which, good job, Lenny. Thank you for your hard work. Who's back there? Lenny actually moved to Helena with us. He was on staff with us in the early days, helped kind of pioneer the music and art stuff, and then went and started his own business, and now we hire his business quite a bit for things like that. But my response to her was, yeah, and then like 150 other similar type of people. Like, we could argue about the linchpin and the irreplaceable and all that, but the astounding part of Christmas Eve for me is the humbling reality that there's Lenny, and then there's dozens and dozens of others that we could say that same thing about. In fact, my favorite part about Christmas Eve at the Civic Center personally is we do this full rehearsal, and because Christmas Eve is mostly about the music, what that allows me to do is be a part of the rehearsal and kind of wander throughout that giant auditorium, and I just love that I get to go sit in the different places and kind of experience all the different stuff, and sometimes I'm being analytical and critical of little kind of detail things, and sometimes I'm singing along, and sometimes I'm thinking about other things, and sometimes I'm silent next to Marla and going, hey, what do you think about this? But for the last 3 years, something that happens to me every time is there's this moment, and I don't go in thinking about it, but there is this moment where I'm just like, Lord, I don't know if we ever get to do this again. Just because of the number of like linchpin type people like Lenny and many others of you who are just like, there's just so many moving parts. And that sense of like surrendered, like deeply engaged, and yet God, I'm trying to stay emotionally aware of the fact that I don't know if my business exists 6 months from now without your help. That kind of posture, in my mind, is what Psalm 23 is all about. But I'd like to take a few minutes to just kind of speak to why we're going to do this, because I think we'll be in this psalm for 7 weeks. I say think because my track record with myself, I tell myself, Adam, anytime you think you can do a 7-week series, make it 4 and you'll be glad that you did. Because we all get bored before that's over, and I run out of things to say, and it gets redundant. So I think we can go 8. I've committed to 7, but I'm willing to pull the plug around the Super Bowl if that's what we have to do. But what happened to me is, that feeling when you have a really successful treasure hunt? Like when you were 6, you got your teeth clean, then you walked out of the nurse's office, and there's that little box, and you get to pick out whether you want the fake teeth or the tattoos. But I mean like the adult or student version of that. Like maybe you found a really good deal on Helena Classifieds or on Craigslist, or maybe you're like an antiquer, or maybe you hate thrift shops, but you happen to be in one and you found like a Patagonia something on the rack for $10 and you know that it's worth way more than that. And you know that feeling, or maybe you're kind of a car person, or whatever your thing is, when you find a really good deal. And there's some seasons of life where it's like you need the really good deal, otherwise you couldn't afford it. And then there's other seasons of life like it's really not about affording. It's about it's really not even about the thing. It's about I found it for $10. You know that thing? I think that's what drove me into Psalm 23, because I think there was this desire for that. I've been living some of that feeling out, by the way, myself. Last summer, my mom, so I grew up going to St. Louis with my parents to watch the Cardinals. That's why I'm a Cardinals fan. And so early last spring, I think it was, my mom bought airplane tickets for my family of 5, along with her and my stepdad, Sam, to all go to St. Louis over Labor Day weekend. Whoa, nobody saw that, right? I'm just going to do this. Okay. So she bought the airplane tickets, and then the deal was like we were going to pay for the rest of it, but then by the time travel baseball was over and we had a kid make regionals, and there was a sense of like, I don't know how we're going to pay for that. We might be eating ramen in St. Louis. And then we had this idea that years ago I used to fly RC airplanes and kind of quit, and then a friend from here actually heard that I used to do that and gave me this kind of garage full of stuff that he had acquired through another kind of arrangement, and he was thinking maybe the boys would get back into it, but they wouldn't. Turns out Fortnite is way more fun than RC airplanes, and so that never really happened. And so we had this idea last July, actually, like, I'm going to start selling that stuff on eBay. And as I started searching around, I thought that you started to see, like, whoa, some of this stuff is worth something. And something is relative when you paid nothing for it, right? So it was this kind of fun deal. Well, anyway, we ended up paying for our half of the St. Louis trip just by selling RC stuff on eBay. Well, that was really fun. And our family had all these conversations afterwards, like, maybe we should invest in experiences more and stuff less, which has been an ongoing kind of conversation with my mom and just family in general. Well, my stepdad, Sam, in the 80s, he was a professional bike mechanic and a bit of a biker himself. He's also a hoarder. He would call himself a collector. I would call him a hoarder. In fact, he was telling us about a bumper sticker over Christmas that said, "It's not hoarding if it's cool stuff." I would beg to differ. But at Thanksgiving, he brought me these 2 totes full of all this bike stuff. And I didn't have any idea what it was, but I quickly learned, like, VAR, big deal in the vintage bike world. Campagnolo, big deal in the bike world. So I've been having, and he's since brought me 2 more totes. So it's this treasure hunt where I pull something out of a tote and I go, looks like a seat post, kind of looks like garbage. Type it into eBay. Last time one of these sold was yesterday. It sold for $90. Unbelievable. So I've been having this endless treasure hunt with bike parts. I think we're going to go watch the Cardinals play in Pittsburgh just on campy stuff. So there's that feeling, right? Well, hopefully, I think that's what can turn a person towards the scriptures, is the sense of, like, Lord, other people say there's stuff in here. I'd like to find it. Well, what happened to me was years and years ago, we did this series called The Lord's Prayer. I think we called it Our Father. From that Jesus prayer in Matthew 6, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. That prayer, you may or may not be familiar with it. Well, for me personally, that's, of all the stuff we've talked about in the last 10 years at Narrate, I think about that stuff more than any of it in terms of a specific series. Because remember, we talked that it's more than just a liturgical prayer, it's a frame. And especially when dealing with insomnia or anxiety or fear, part of what we talked about it is if we just kind of over the course of a day hit every line of that prayer, our Father who art in heaven, our God who's near, God help me live as though I'm near, as though you're near. Hallowed be your name. God, help me keep my life about you, not about me. Your kingdom come, your will be done. I get hung up on that one because it's all about surrender and control and God's priorities and our priorities. In fact, I just used it this week. Got this stupid cold, and you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning like, duh, I'm 40, I have a cold. Sleep is becoming more and more of a precious commodity. And rather than grab an earbud and listen to some trivial ESPN or Broncos thing, or rather than get angry, for me, I just grab hold of the Lord's Prayer and just kind of slowly start working through that. Well, that for me has been a treasure. I don't know if it has been for you, but I'm also an American consumer, and 1 is good, 2 is better, right? I mean, that's just kind of the way we work. If you like stuff, then you don't want 1 fly rod, you want 6 fly rods. You don't want 1 bike, you want 4 bikes, right? Like, that's kind of the way this thing works. Well, because the Lord's Prayer thing has been going so well for me, I thought there's got to be others, and Psalm 23, best I can tell, is one of those. Dallas Willard, I heard him say for years that the first thing he did, I think in his case, literally, he rolls out of bed, kneels down next to his bed, and prays Psalm 23. Now, perhaps like you, I've been familiar enough with Psalm 23 to know what it was, but to go like, I don't necessarily see that. So on Monday, when I started working on this weekend from this series, I pulled up Evernote. My first study entry on this prayer was in the fall of 2017. So I've been working on this for a bit. And in fact, initially I pulled books and commentaries, and to be honest with you, it just all kind of fell flat. There's not as much cross-stitching has been done in the name of Psalm 23. That was a joke. You kind of let that one, right? Like, as many grandmas have it on their wall, and there just hasn't been that much scholastic kind of scholarly stuff done on Psalm 23. But then last Easter, Dallas Willard released a book on Psalm 23, which some of you are going like, wait a minute, I thought Dallas was dead. He is. That's part of why I was intrigued when I saw that on Amazon that he was going to release a book. I was like, I knew this guy was talented, but I had no idea he was so talented that he could continue to release books after his demise. Well, what happened was decades ago, he did a series rather in his own local church. So he wasn't the pastor of that church. He's a professor at USC, but what I gather was this fairly small church. he did an evening series. I think it was 8 long. It might have been 7 long, just from Psalm 23. Well, his pastor had the wherewithal to record the thing, like cassette tape, hit record and play at the same time, and sometimes you can't get them both to go down. That kind of, like flip the tape over at the right time, that kind of record. And when he was done, he pulled Dallas aside and said, dude, this is a book. And Dallas said, I'm too busy. And so he's just been holding these tapes. Well, after Dallas died, this pastor went to Dallas's daughter and said, listen, I've got this treasure trove. We've all heard Dallas talk about how important Psalm 23 was to him, but we've never really heard him teach on it explicitly, like you get it in parts and pieces. Here's this thing. So what they did is they took all of his tapes, kind of transcribed them, which formed the background, or at least the outline of the book, and then they spent a bunch of energy, a couple years, cross-referencing all these ideas and all the references that he had made over the years to Psalm 23, and they published a book, A Life Without Lack. So we didn't buy a bunch of them because I feel like I inundate you with books. I recommend it. Dallas Willard is the king of the run-on sentence, so you'll either love it or hate it. I had to read it twice before I understood 10% of it. But that kind of further informed all of this. And so what we're going to do is spend a bunch of time, somewhat on Dallas's stuff, somewhat on other stuff, and just kind of work through this. Now, about 3 weeks ago, Kate and Marla needed from me the series overview for this series, which for me is the hardest part of my whole gig because I don't write well. It's not a strength of mine at all. I also don't write concisely very well. And so I blocked a couple hours and I was kind of working on, I already had the series laid out, but like to kind of do justice to that and something that we would send to an email that you would actually read without archiving is really, really difficult for me. And I don't blame you if you archive them, by the way. And I found myself, though, saying this sentence over and over. It's either, and I guess this would be my summary for what it's worth of my couple years, it's either a profound set of promises or it's the most classic representation of religious overpromising. Like it makes no attempt to take a middle ground on the promises of God, the life with God. If it's guilty of anything, it's either true or it's an overpromise. Years ago, I worked for this guy, Vern in Billings, one of the greatest leaders I've ever known personally. I got to work with him from the time I was 20 to 29, and one of the values he just pounded into us was this idea of under-promise, over-deliver, under-promise, over-deliver. And his point was this. He would say, listen, if someone asks you for something and you think you can deliver it by Wednesday, tell them Friday and then deliver it on Wednesday. But far better to do that than do the reverse, to tell them Wednesday and then deliver it on Friday. If you think you can be somewhere at 8 o'clock, then tell them 8:15 and then get there at 8 o'clock. Like Vern just pounded that into us, this under-promise, over-deliver. What occurred to me this week is like Psalm 23 is a classic example of the danger of overpromising. Like just a cursory look this morning at what the promises of Psalm 23 are. Psalm 23, its promise, among other things, is a life that is completely uncontrolled by fear. Not a life that doesn't experience fear. That would definitely be an overpromise. I think part of what I love about the scriptures is Jesus and everyone else, they don't say, if you do it right, you won't experience fear. But Psalm 23 is very direct in saying that if you get the connections right, fear won't control your life. The fear of tomorrow won't control your life. That fear of bad news that we have. Years ago, our friend who wrote The Shack, the way he said it, he called it future tripping. He's like, you know how many times, Adam, I've been to my own funeral? You know the number of ways my kids have died? That thing that we do where we catastrophize? Psalm 23 says that it won't impact you. It won't control you. The fear of circumstances, the fear of things outside of your control, the fear of tomorrow, the fear of want, the fear of death. Psalm 23, as best I can tell, is one of the rare places in the Old Testament that actually cares to talk about life after death. Very little about that in the Jewish scriptures up until the New Testament. It also, Dallas's title for his book, A Life Without Lack. Psalm 23 promises that if we form those connections with God correctly, then our needs are met, which I struggle with because then you go to CNN.com and go, what about the Christ follower in Southeast Asia? It feels like an overpromise, doesn't it? That this life where your needs are already met, not because of what you have, but because of who God is. It promises this connection with God that just kind of persists through any and all circumstances. So that's just kind of a taste. You get the sense of like, wow, it might be a set of things as to why you've stopped going to church. Because you tried it. And for 20 years, you tried to live it. In fact, this for me is that time of year where I think about just quitting. I don't know if any of you experience this. Like, you ever cyclically go through that where you have this week a year where you just think of quitting on Jesus? And for me, every year, for me, it's not about whether or not Jesus was true, whether or not his understanding of God was the best one we've ever been given, whether or not he was God, whether or not the resurrection was real. For me, I return to this place every year, and the holidays seem to be especially good at getting me here, of this sense of like, God, I wouldn't quit because of you. I would quit because of my inability to come in alignment with what I've been told would be the implications of following you. It's almost like for all future people who want to follow Jesus, it might be better off if I exit stage left. You ever get that feeling? Like Psalm 23 are these huge promises. But I think there's a doorway. And I think the gateway, and I think this is actually where it's different than Jesus' prayer. I was thinking this week, I don't know how much time I've spent on Psalm 23 at work and at home and in the different areas and thinking and all that. But however much it was, I would be confident saying 75% of it I've spent on the first 5 words. I think this is where it's different than the Lord's Prayer. And that doesn't mean like I spent the first 5 words, 75% of my time on the first page of the paper, and then I realized it's supposed to be 10 long. It wasn't like that. But I just keep coming back to the first 5 words because it seems to me that the first 5 words unlock all the other things. Now, what are those? The Lord is my shepherd, which can be hard for us to abide in because we're not sheep and we're not shepherds and we don't know any. But David, the author, was. Before he was king, before he was ruler, before he was warrior, before he was among the 2 or 3 most famous Jewish people who've ever lived, David was a Bedouin who took care of sheep, which means he would have known a couple things. First, David would have known that a sheep's existence is entirely dependent upon the character of the shepherd. David would have known that sheep don't get to pick their shepherd, but he would have seen firsthand, just like dog owners and parents and other things we see, that some shepherds don't care a lick about their sheep. And because of that, the life of the sheep is miserable. And David would have known that the reverse is also often true. That when a shepherd is good, the life of the sheep is okay. David would have also known that this claim, and this might mess with you a little bit, but I think that would be a good thing. This claim, the Lord is my shepherd, Yahweh is my shepherd, was not a religiously unique claim. Those of you who use the Archaeology Study Bible, you can go to Psalm 23, and one of the first things it'll tell you is that the Lord is my shepherd. We now know other regional views of God in David's day had similar ideas. Marduk is my shepherd. Baal is my shepherd. So David would have been doing something that involved what? He would have been going, okay, based upon who my shepherd is, that determines the quality of my life and the ability for my needs to be met. And so David is not just claiming God as shepherd, he's claiming God as shepherd as opposed to who? Himself? Marduk? Baal? Like, I wonder if the first 5 words, if the first thing they do is invite us into this life of surrender. This reminder that our life is not our own, that we're not under our own care, that the kingdom life is this life where we turn ourselves over to God and somehow lean into that. Now, I know for some of you, that grosses you out because it sounds like sitting on your couch and praying prayers and waiting for God to show up. But I wonder if we can agree that the easiest thing to do would be to be spiritual and do nothing, right? Like to talk spiritual, to read spiritual, to think spiritual, and then to sit on your couch and wait for God to do everything. If we could agree that's easy, I wonder if we could agree that it's a little bit harder to say there is no God and everything is up to me. Like everything is in my hands. What if the real challenge is living in the tension? The God, if there is a God, God, would you lead me if you do lead people tension. The tension of you're not a worm and you're not a snail and you're not a sparrow, you're a human. And humans have will. Humans have tenacity. Humans get bored. Humans like to make things. Humans aren't just made to sit in seats. Humans are designed to be people with a bias for action. What gets you in trouble with God? My sense is that in a room like this, it's not the couch version. It's the forgetting version. It's the self-responsibility version. It's the tenacity. It's the chutzpah. It's the go make things happen. I wonder if the timeless genius of Psalm 23 is this invitation to live in the tension. God, I'm the boss, and therefore I have to make decisions. God, I am the mom, and therefore I have to make hard calls. But I'm also not doing this alone. I think that's what I'm describing on Christmas Eve when I have this experience of Lord, I don't take for granted that we get to do this every year because so many moving pieces have to fit together to make this thing happen. I think we've designed Narrate around this idea to go, we're not committed to being a church for the next 50 years. Not that we don't want to, but we've always said we want to be a community of owners, of high buy-in, and it's astounding what we have. And so it's this daily bread of, boy, I was actually thinking about someone recently who was like, I haven't seen him for a while. And then I caught myself and went, boy, I sure hope that if Narrate isn't helpful to them anymore, they go find a place that is. That's the commitment we've made, isn't it? This both and tension. I think I saw it play itself out this week. We've been wrestling with all of our Easter stuff for a couple years. It's not lost on us that we barely have enough space as it is, let alone for Easter. We've been wrestling with all these different ideas, and then recently we added a race to the Easter weekend and then this egg hunt. And so for months and months and months, we've been kind of working on how are we going to do Easter this year, and is there going to be a race, and is there going to be an egg hunt, and all these different factors. Well, one of the things that we wanted to do with the race was we've been wanting to give it away to an organization, not be involved, but we started this thing called the Mount Helena Egg Scramble, and the idea was that we could raise funds for local things, and we have. The first year we bought new cross-country pennies for all the middle school kids. Last year we were able to give a bunch of money to the drug treatment court, but part of what occurred to us after last year was that its real ability, in addition to creating a great experience that's affordable and you get a great shirt and all those different things, its bigger ability to raise funds, that would grow if we could give it to an organization who would get excited about selling t-shirt sponsorships. And it's not that we're opposed to that, it's that we don't want to do the sponsorship thing we already do for ales. That's difficult enough, and quite frankly, we only have one bucket. Our resource arm for this community is the only one we have is the bucket going by you, because when you come to an egg hunt or you go to Christmas Eve or you come to a race, we want our givers to know that's where your money went. That's part of the hard part about giving is not getting the reward of where did it go. And so we don't want to do the sponsorship thing. But what's not lost on us is if someone did do the sponsorship thing, you could make 20 grand on the race by using your own network and selling sponsorships to your own friends and business owners and all those different things. Well, we've tried. We've had some fruitful conversations with different organizations in town. It just hasn't worked out. But it's been this constant kind of, okay, Lord, we think this is your idea, but it's not working. Well, we've had the luxury of time until about now. And we came back from Christmas going, we've got to make a decision on all things Easter in the next few weeks, and we're getting close. Well, the first meeting that I had scheduled, first lunch meeting I had scheduled when I got back, was with a guy named John. John is a Helena guy, a Capitol High grad. I think he graduated sometime in the 90s. He started an organization after graduating college called Tiny Hands International, which is now called Love Justice. You can go to their website, lovejustice.ngo. John is a guy whose sister attends here. He shows up about once a year when he's in town. He lives in Kathmandu, Nepal, the rest of the year, along with his wife. And what Love Justice does is they set up human trafficking centers. They don't traffic, anti-human trafficking centers. They're in 15 countries across the world. And what they do is, it's some kind of survey work they do. They partner with indigenous churches to get the work done. It's this remarkable organization, and every time John and I meet, we kind of nerd out because we think theologically in similar levels, and there's all kinds of common ground there. So I think this is the third time we've had lunch, and we just kind of exchange ideas with no real commitment because we've never really talked about any kind of partnership in any way. But this year when we were meeting, there was just a sense of like, he was talking about like he would love to do something out of Helena because it's his hometown, and he's got lots of people here who know him, and they would love to do something for this organization. And then it hit me, I was like, dude, we've got this race. We've been trying to give this race away. And so I kind of shared all these ideas with the race, and he got really, really excited about the race. Well then, as we're talking, it occurred to me that simultaneously, one of the things that we've been wrestling with as a church for quite some time is, what does it look like to serve poor people in a welfare state? Now, that's not a political comment. It's not even an anti-welfare comment. It's just the realization that what it looks like to serve an orphan and widow in 2019 Helena is different than what it looked like in Nazareth in 3 BC. Because it was very tangible then, like without help, they died. But today there's these organizations that do it. In fact, and again, I work so hard to be politically stupid, but we've wrestled with how do we do this? And again, it's not a like, let's replace government and giving. It's not like that's not a criticism of the government at all. In fact, I heard a stat recently, if every church in the United States gave 100% of their operating budget to serving poor people, it wouldn't cover the cost of food stamps. So I'm not for a second saying if the government just got out of our way, the church could do their job again. It's not like that at all. It's just been this genuine, like, I just don't want to throw money at things because that's what we're supposed to do because God told us to love orphans and widows. And as I was talking to John, it occurred to me like, wait a minute. We've got these people in Ecuador that we serve with and have a lot of fun doing that, and we unapologetically say we're not trying to change the world, but we can change the life of a kid with Down syndrome in Ecuador. And as I was talking to John, I was like, but wait, what if where this led? And I started saying, like, you need to come speak here because he's this remarkably engaging guy who's doing this crazy stuff. Like, I feel like I have to give away my Christian card when I even meet with him because, like, here I am living in Helena, and he's living in Kathmandu helping, like, slaves get free. And he said, well, Adam, like, the sponsorship thing, if you were to get involved with that, which if we were to do that would be just writing them into our budget, would be, the neat thing about that is he said those places are run by indigenous churches. So you'd be helping a church and you'd be helping people who are being trafficked. My point is simply this. I think, for me, it was this reminder, the Lord is my shepherd. As we look ahead and we go like, God, what career am I supposed to have, and who am I supposed to marry, and where am I going to school, and what is life going to be like when my kids are gone, and all the things that we can stress and worry about. I wonder if the value of Psalm 23 is it brings us back to, oh yeah, the Lord is my shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. Now that's big picture stuff, and I don't know about you, I find that way easier when I'm thinking timelines of months and years. How do we do it in the daily? What does living in that tension look like in the daily? Well, there's a guy named Benedict who centuries ago, he was an Italian follower of Jesus who at 20 became a monk, became a pretty type A kind of monk within the Catholic tradition. He started something called the Examen. And what Benedict did was he taught people how to start their day and end their day, and I think originally there was even some sprinkled into the day, by asking a couple questions. The Examen was, okay, Lord, where were you in my life today? And for what it's worth, my goal for a Sunday morning is that you would leave having some sense of like, oh yeah, God's in my life. And discernment. Okay, Lord, where were you in my life today, and how did I do at discerning following you, and what do I need to change from all that, and how do I go about this? Here's my point is, I wonder if the memorized, meditated Psalm 23, if part of the invitation is that it's a morning and evening, it's a drive home, it's a drive to work, whatever that looks like for you, invitation to live in that tension. Because the Lord is my shepherd is this confession, oh yeah, I'm human, I'm made to take charge. God would rather rein in a stallion than give life to a dead horse. But oh yeah, God's the boss, and I'm trying to follow your lead. And God, what does it look like to lead you through this particular scenario? One more story. While we were back in Billings, we got to have lunch with a couple that my wife has known since she was in high school. My kids call them Nana and Papa. Their names are Pammy and Curtis, and I got their permission to share this story, by the way. Pammy she's an unbelievable woman who in her 20s was teaching elementary school in Ronan, and then she feels like God plucked her out of that role and made her the kids pastor at a church in Billings called Faith Chapel, which quickly went on to become the largest church in the state. And I personally know people who say the only reason they went to Faith Chapel, despite the phenomenal things, was the kids ministry that Pammy led there. Well, part of Pammy's story was early in her journey, she felt like God asked her to stay single. And so she did. Into her 50s, she was still the single woman who for decades was the kids pastor of all these kids and all these families, and therefore she was like the princess of this several thousand person church. Well, in her 50s, Pammy met a guy and felt God's permission to get married. His name is Curtis, and he's as remarkable as she is. But part of what was interesting about those early days from the outside looking in was Curtis had been divorced. He had raised kids. And I'll never forget at their wedding, they got married a few years after Teresa and I, so I think like early 2000s. At their wedding, Stan Simmons, the kind of iconic leader of this church, he started the ceremony by looking at them and saying, "Curtis, you're the most scrutinized man in Billings," which was a very true statement. Well, we sat down to have dinner with them knowing that there's a context. The context is Curtis has been battling cancer for years, and he's now in that stage where they can't solve the cancer. What they can do is try to buy him years. We also knew that Pammy's mom is in her 90s, suffering from dementia, physically well, mentally not well, if you know what I mean. And so we sat down and had dinner with them knowing that, we're 40 and young and healthy, and they're dealing with a different season of life. And generally when we get together, it's not a lot of spiritual talk because she's worked her whole life in the church, and so we just kind of connect on, let's just be. But she started talking about both of these realities in her life, and she talked about the exhaustion of going to visit your mom and having your mom be mostly unkind, and knowing that that's not really who your mom is, but there's stuff going on in her brain that she can't control, and yet at the same time you're sitting under this anger. And at one point, she kind of alluded to the I don't know what God is doing, and I don't know why he's doing it. And at one point, she paused, and I've never seen her do this with the boys before, and she looked at the boys, and she said, "Boys," and here's this woman that just embodies Psalm 23. And she looked at the boys, and she said, "Boys, there better be room for mystery in your theology. Because if there's not room for mystery, you're toast." I think those are my words, but the mystery part were her. That it was very ominous. You better arrive at these seasons of life knowing that you don't know everything. And then she was sharing, and again, I asked her permission to share this. She was sharing that a couple years ago, she was going through this thing with the Lord, going in her words, she would say, "Jesus, just would you please take mom home? This is ridiculous." And she said she had this moment a couple years ago where God just said to her, "Pammy, stop pushing. Just stop pushing." And the remarkable thing was Curtis, not in this intellectual way, but in this really kind of subconscious way, he just goes, "Yeah, that sounds like him. Yeah, that sounds like him." I wonder if the invitation of Psalm 23, should we choose to memorize it and return to it and become familiar with it, is this invitation of, yes, God made you to be tenacious and go after your dreams and be all those things that American culture embodies as well as anything. And to do the even more difficult thing of returning to oh yeah, the Lord is my shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. Stop pushing. I wonder if it would be helpful for you to think of seasons in your life where you've done this. You have memories of seasons where you're so glad that he didn't ask you to the prom, even though it was a tragedy when he didn't originally ask you to the prom. Now you see him at the reunion and you're like, whew, so glad, right? What are those moments for you that can drive trust in the next one? And what is the moment now? And for those of you that maybe have never done that and you're not even sure why you're here because you're skeptical about the whole thing, one of the most powerful prayer anybody ever prays is, God, if there is a God, would you lead me if you do lead people? And the great invitation I would have for you is, what is the thing in your life that feels outside of your control? And the thing is, you don't even have to believe that God is there. Like, you can try it out. Just pray that prayer. God, if there is a God, Lord, if you do shepherd, just try him. That's what we do. We don't believe in things and then do them. We try things and then believe in them. Just try it. What's the thing in your life where you're acutely aware of the fact that you're out of control and it's driving you crazy and it's the first problem in a long time you haven't been able to solve yourself? And what happens if you pray a psalm of surrender? Oh yeah, the Lord is my shepherd. He invites me into a life where my job is not to push. You know, band's going to come up here and lead us in a song. We're not going to do the close eyes prayers thing. I'm going to invite you to stand, if you would. And as they come up here, I just want to kind of do a benediction thing over you and say, may you step into the tension of being made human, where you get to do and create and be tenacious, and yet find the space in your life to surrender and understand what that looks like. May you discover a God who, because he's in your life, you lack nothing. We're going to sing.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.